The theme of text in this set, in our American realism tradition, is war. And war is a recurring theme that we will talk about throughout the course and throughout American literature, because it is something that really sort of defines a lot of ideas and as they shift throughout time. So just as an example, when we divide American literature into sort of the historical time periods, the most often place that people cut it in half is at the Civil War. You have pre-Civil War literature and post-Civil War literature. Now on the pre-side, the traditions, you have pre-discovery and colonial, which is literature up until the Revolutionary War. And then you have the Revolutionary War through the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, the realism tradition that we're in, we have the Civil War till World War One, and then World War One, modernism starts all the way up until World War Two, which is where postmodernism starts. So the American literary tradition is literally segmented by major wars. It's just something to keep in mind in terms of how these authors represent war and how it influences these shifts in the literary aesthetic and style. Now, you have already sort of got a taste of what the representation of war looks like in literature, in American literature, in Catherine Maria Sedgwick's Hope Leslie. I'm going to read you a quote, a very small part, but a quote from that chapter. It says, "Digby loved, as well as another man, and particularly those who have any brief military experience, to fight his battles over again, and Everall was at an age to listen with delight to tales of adventure and danger." So this quote is pointing at what much of the literary tradition is challenging in its representation of war. So this quote gets at the idea of an adventure, a dangerous adventure, this heroic story, these battle stories, this idea of war that is romanticized, this romantic idea of, patriotically going to fight for your country and coming out a hero. That idea of what a war hero is and what a war story is something that authors begin to engage with in realism. So the Civil War was an extremely bloody war on American soil, and American soil is something to emphasize about the Civil War, because we really hadn't up until that point, and wouldn't again see that sort of domestic warfare really in our own backyards. So in the American Civil War, between estimates of 600,000 and 750,000 people were killed. That was 12% of the population. That is a lot of death. And many, if not most people in the country were either knew somebody or had gone to war, knew somebody who had gone to war, or were affected by the sort of devastation and destruction of the war, even if they weren't themselves, active participants in it. So after that, we also, in 1898, we have the Spanish-American War, which is what the two texts you're reading are actually related to. That shifting idea of war and this new war that was going on, and how war stories are represented. So if you think about a war story, the romantic idea of a war story is often this sort of adventure hero tale. And when you think about like a soldier telling a war story, you think you're going to hear these stories of like action and bravery and things like that. Now, I don't want to undercut, the bravery of those who serve. However, what many people had discovered after the war was that those stories did not feel as heroic and story-worthy as that romantic idea of war. As a matter of fact, many of you who may know or have family or have served yourself, a lot of people who have been involved in active combat actively don't want to tell war stories because they are so shocking sometimes, the reality of war is. And that's what these two texts are dealing with. The first that you're reading is Mark Twain's The War Prayer, which is a very short piece of satire in which we have someone leading a prayer prior to soldiers making their way onto the battlefield. Interesting note about this text is that it wasn't published during Mark Twain's lifetime. It was published after his death. Now, Mark Twain, who is this like very important and popular, almost celebrity figure in the literary world at the time, there's speculation that maybe he didn't want to publish this rather scathing piece of satire, but we can't confirm or deny that. Just an interesting thing to note. And then you're also reading William Dean Howell's Editha. Editha is an interesting transition from this theme into our next, which is women and marriage, because this is a story that focuses on the wife of a soldier and her idea of war and her idea of what a war story is and what a war hero is versus the reality of it. So as you're reading it, you want to keep those things in mind, particularly these ideas of realism where we're taking that romantic idea and instead we're representing, using techniques like satire and realism to convey the truth of what life was like in those situations.